Hello, fellow Planeswalkers. It's Scott, and it's day 4 of Wilds of Eldraine spoilers. We got a lot of interesting cards to talk about today, but before we get started, special thanks to Caffeinated Gamers for sponsoring this video and all of our Wild Eldraine spoiler videos. So let's get started with the cards from today. The first is Asinine Antics. For 2 and 2 blue mana, you get a sorcery, and you may cast Asinine Antics as though it had flash if you pay 2 more to cast it. For each creature your opponent controls, create a cursed roll token attached to that creature. So this is the first time in memory that blue almost gets a board wipe, because taking all of your opponent's creatures, making them 1/1s, is a very powerful ability where they might have a huge board presence, but now everything's only a 1/1, and the result of that is you have now a chance in blue to really downgrade your opponent. Now, we also have several cards in Standard already that anything that is 1/1, that we can give it -1/-1. So I think in combination, those two cards can definitely clear a board of all your opponent's creatures. And the nice thing about this, it's one-sided. You're going to get nothing happen to your creatures. All of your opponent's creatures are going to be cursed. So they take on that role, they become 1/1s, and they have to figure out how to defeat you. Now, the downside of this is that it doesn't take away any of the abilities. But if they have a Sheoldred on the field, it makes Sheoldred a 1/1 much easier to deal with than a 4/5. And other cards can then go ahead and remove it. So I think there's a lot of playability for this in Standard. We'll have to kind of see where it fits in, but I'm excited that blue gets the ability to actually go ahead and deal with creatures in a relatively effective way. And they also get the advantage of all of those enchantments coming into play. So we've already got the Selesnya enchantments deck, so maybe they go into blue as well, so they have this available to them, and then they get the benefit of having all of the enchantments come into play as well and activate their cards that care about how many enchantments you have in the game and come into play and get the benefit of all your cards that really care about how many enchantments there are in play. Next, we've got Eldraine, the Pyro Hammer. For 2 and 2 red mana, you get a legendary creature that's a human knight. Eldraine's 4/4, and whenever an instant or sorcery spell you control that targets only a single creature deals damage to that creature, Eldraine deals that much damage to each opponent. So I think this is a really good card. Right now in Standard, we're dealing with 4 and 5 toughness creatures, but red decks tend not to play outside of Nahiri's Warcrafting. They don't tend to play in the main deck other cards that could do 4 damage. So what I see with this is an outstanding way. You get Eldraine on the field, and then you use your Nahiri's Warcrafting and other spells targeting your opponent's creature and then actually damaging your opponent that same amount. So I think in the late game, this is a great finisher card for red decks. We'll just have to see how many copies of it we're going to want in our Standard deck. Next, we've got Restless Spire, our 3rd creature land from the set. Restless Spire enters the battlefield tapped. You can play it for blue or red mana. And for a blue and a red mana until end of turn, Restless Spire becomes a 2/1 blue and red elemental creature with, as long as it's your turn, this creature has first strike, it's still a land. Whenever Restless Spire attacks, you get to scry 1. So the scrying ability isn't like incredibly important, but it might be in some decks. I think this really works well, as I've been talking about throughout spoiler season, in an Is It Spells deck, because it gives you that added 1 additional attacker or 2 additional attackers for a relatively low mana cost, and the first strike is relevant because that will allow them to kill smaller creatures so that then your opponent has fewer blockers in the future, or after a board wipe you activate these for 2 mana and you go ahead and get the last little bit of damage you need to win the game. So I'm excited about this one. I think this is a very good card, and we'll just have to see what deck actually is going to want it in Standard. But this is definitely going to be something that Standard decks will want to play with. Next, we've got a couple of lower rarity cards that are uncommon, but I think they've got definite playability in Standard. First is Knight of the Sweet's Revenge. For 3 and a green mana, you get an enchantment, and when Knight of the Sweet's Revenge enters the battlefield, create a food token. Okay, food you control has tap to add 1 green mana, and for 7 mana, 2 of those are green, you can sacrifice Knight of the Sweet's Revenge creatures you control, get X plus X until end of turn, where X is the number of foods you control. Activate only as a sorcery. So in a Foods Matter deck, so if we do get a deck built around food, this is going to be a critical card in that, because it's going to turn all of your food into mana. So you don't have to crack it for life. You can tap them every single turn, add some additional mana to your mana pool, push you forward, and then eventually for that 7 mana, when you've got a bunch of food in play, you can sacrifice it and then hopefully on one swing win the game. So what happens with food is really determine how good this card is in Standard, but it's definitely something that I expect to see people trying to build around in Standard. Next, we have Royal Treatment. For a green mana, you get an instant. Target creature you control gains hexproof until end of turn. Create a Royal Roll token attached to that creature. So I really like this card. We've already got a couple of 1 mana green cantrips that are basically there to protect a creature in play, and they already see play. So I think this, though, is a little bit better than that, because you get that added benefit of a Royal Roll being attached to the creature, and that's going to increase its power and toughness by 1/1, and then also it gives it ward to make it a little bit harder to kill it in the future. So I think this is going to go into decks that are using that as a replacement, because I think it's just a better card overall. Next, we've got Discerning Financier. For 2 and a white mana, you get a Human Noble. That's a 2/3. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent controls more lands than you, create a treasure token. So this is a ramp card, in essence, in white. If you're the person who's going second, you're probably consistently going to be behind on land, and this gives you the opportunity to add treasure tokens to add a little bit of additional mana, hopefully to get ahead on the board over time. Now, is this main deckable? Maybe, but the 3-spot in white decks is so crowded right now that I'm not sure. But I think in any deck that you want to play white in, and you want to ramp, this is a good card for that, because it's going to meet the criteria of, hopefully every turn or every other turn, you're going to get an extra treasure token, which will make it easier for you to cast your spells. Also, for 2 and a white mana, you can choose another player. That player gains control of target treasure you control, and you get to draw a card. So if you would rather draw a card, you can pay 3 mana, transfer the treasure token to your opponent, you get that benefit of it. So I think this is a card that has Standard playability, but I'm not sure where it fits yet. Certainly in a limited situation, this is a good card. Next, we've got Dutiful Griffin. For 3 and 2 white mana, you get a Griffin. That's a 4/4. It has flying. And you can pay 2 and a white mana, sacrifice 2 enchantments, and return Dutiful Griffin from your graveyard to your hand. Limited playable, 4/4 for 5. Is definitely limited playable. Standard, probably not going to see it much at all. Next, we've got Shrouded Shepherd. For 1 and a white mana, you get a 2/2 Spirit Warrior. And when Shrouded Shepherd enters the battlefield, target creature you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So I think this is, that ability when it comes into play is just a nice ability to add on to any card. So you're able to pump up 1 creature for that turn. So you're getting extra value out of the card. And again, value cards are really important in Standard right now because of the mid-range nature of the format. So this, I think, is good generally in Standard. Now, this is going to have to be, if we do see it played, is going to be in an Orzhov deck, because it has an adventure, Cleave Shadows. For 1 and a black mana, creatures your opponent controls get -1/-1 until end of turn. Earlier we talked about Asinine Animist, and this card I think goes really well with that. If you can play it in an Esper Shell and then do that to your opponent. You've got this adventure that could then wipe out their entire board. Now, is that ideal? But right now, if we look at black removal, a lot of it's now situational removal. It's all spot removal. And we really don't have a good board wipe actually right now in black. So maybe the combination of those two would be something that would work in standard. But again, we're trying to build combos out of things, and that usually doesn't work out tremendously well. But it's something that if you're playing this card in that deck, you don't even have to have it on the turn that you play Asinine Animist. You just have to have it at some point in the future, and hopefully that wipes out their entire board for you. Next, we have Threadbind Click. For 3 and a blue mana, you get a fairy. It has flying and is a 3/3. And it has the adventure, Rip the Seams. For 2 and a white mana, you get the instant that destroy target tap creature. So definitely another one of those cards that probably more meant for limited than anything else. 3/3 for a 3/3 with flying for 4 mana is not great in the current standard, but in limited, having the ability to destroy a tap creature and then cast a 3/3 flyer is good for that format. Next, we've got Into the Fey Court. For 3 and 2 blue mana, you get a sorcery. You get to draw 3 cards and create a 1/1 blue fairy creature token with flying. This creature can block only creatures with flying. Definitely a good limited card to play. Card draw late in the game can make a tremendous difference between winning and losing. And I think this is a good example of a card that does that. And it also leaves a body behind. Next, we've got Chancellor of Tales. For 3 and a blue mana, you get a Fairy Advisor that's a 2/3. It has flying, and when you cast an adventure spell, you may copy it. You may choose new target for the copy. So if we do indeed have a fairies deck, I can see a couple of copies of this being in there, because you're going to have some fairies that do have adventures that probably have abilities you would like to copy if they're played. And we just saw in a couple cards ago the fact that you can destroy a tap creature. Okay, destroying 2 tap creatures for the same price is a great value. So I think in a fairies deck, it has some playability, and definitely in limited, this is going to be a good card, because anytime you're doubling things like that, that's going to have a big impact on the overall game state. Next, we have Hopeless Nightmare. For a black mana, you get an enchantment, and when Hopeless Nightmare enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. And when Hopeless Nightmare is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you can scry 2. And you can go ahead and sacrifice Hopeless Nightmare for 2 and a black mana to get the scry ability and move forward with your game plan. And I think this is going to be one of a couple of cards, because we also got, yesterday we talked about Ego Drain, where we've got these cards now in standard that are attacking the opponent's hand on turn 1. And the nice thing about it, there's not necessarily a limitation to what can be removed from the opponent's hand. Now, obviously, Hopeless Nightmare, you want to cast that early in the game and make your opponent discard something, hopefully something that they can't cast for a while. And then Ego Drain, you're just going after their best card. And hopefully, with both of them, you're now really limiting what your opponent can do. And the loss of life from Hopeless Nightmare probably isn't all that big of a deal in the game. So I think these are both cards that have some playability in standard. Certainly is sideboard potential in both of them in a variety of decks. Next, we have Spiteful Hexmage. For 1 black mana, you get a Human Warlock. That's a 3/2. And when Spiteful Hexmage enters the battlefield, create a Cursed Roll token attached to target creature you control. So you can play this on turn 1. You've got a Cursed Roll token attached to it, so it's only a 1/1. But on turn 2, then you can also go ahead and cast Lord Skitter's Blessing. For 1 and a black mana. You get an enchantment that says at the beginning of your draw step, if you control an enchanted creature, you lose 1 life and you draw an additional card. So these 2 cards, I think, were designed to go together. You play Spiteful Hexmage on turn 1, you play Lord Skitter's Blessing on turn 2, and every turn now you're going to lose a life, but you're going to gain that card advantage. And getting 4 or 5 or 6 extra cards over the course of a game, if not more, really is going to put the ball in your court and help you win that game. Help dig for your Sheoldreds or other cards that you want in your mono black deck or Dimir deck, or even an Esper control deck, I think has some desirability for this combination of things. And also with Spiteful Hexmage, it says attached to target creature you control. It doesn't have to go to Spiteful Hexmage. So if you've got another creature in control, maybe you've got a rat token in control, since so many of those are already in standard from the set, you cast it, you attach the Cursed Roll token to the rat token, so it has the problem. It still activates Lord Skitter's Blessing, but now you've got a 3/2, and for 1 mana, that's a really big bargain. Next, we've got Taken by Nightmares. For 2 and 2 black mana, we get an instant that exiles target creature. If you control an enchantment, you get to scry 2. Definitely a limited playable targeted removal spell. Nothing really beyond that. Next, we've got Redcap Gutter Dweller. For 2 and 2 red mana, we get a Goblin Warrior. That's a 3/3. It has Menace, and when Redcap Gutter Dweller enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 black rat creature tokens with this creature cannot block. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on Redcap Gutter Dweller and exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. So what you're getting for 4 mana is 3 bodies, 2 of which you probably are going to use to sacrifice to get an additional card on the next turn and pump up your Redcap Gutter Dweller to a 4/4, if not a 5/5. And if you've got other ways to create creature tokens, you may even do it a third time. So that card draw or card advantage there, I think, is really critical. So I think this has some playability in red decks. Earlier we talked about Imidane, so we got another 4-drop in red to go along with Redcap Gutter Dweller. So I'm not sure exactly how many copies of each goes in a red deck, but this is certainly more of a red mid-range strategy than the red aggro strategies that we've seen so far in Standard. But I think it's a really good card. I think it has a lot of potential to really help red have a larger presence in Standard. Next, we have Two-Headed Hunter. For 4 and a red mana, you get a giant that's a 5/4 with Menace. So we're seeing this theme of Menace on red cards. And it has the adventure Twice the Rage. For 1 and a red mana, you get an instant where target creature gains double strike until end of turn. So this is the part of the card I think is the part that you really are going to be looking at and determine whether you're going to play it in your deck. Giving a creature double strike for 2 mana is an on-rate ability. And then later you can cast Two-Headed Hunter when you don't have anything else to do and get that advantage of the body that's a 5/4 with Menace. So again, it's not a great card overall, but having that ability to give something double strike in the mid to late game might just be all the difference between winning and losing. You say you've got a Shivan Devastator on the field, your opponent hasn't been able to move it, and you go ahead and cast Twice the Rage on it, and now it does, say, 8 to 10 damage rather than 4 to 5 damage, and that's the difference in winning and losing. So I think this has some standard playability, but again, it's going to have to be in the right deck. Next, we've got Korvold and the Noble Thief. This is a saga, and on chapter 1 and 2, you get to create a treasure token. And then on turn 3, you get to exile the top 3 cards of target opponent's library, and you may play those cards this turn. So you've got, for 4 mana, this seems to me it's a limited card. It's not great. You get some mana out of the treasures, so you can cast your opponent's cards, because the thing that really limits this in my mind is on chapter 3, it doesn't say you may use mana of any kind to go ahead and cast those spells. So you're really limited to the mana that you have, and treasures then become really important in that matchup. Next, we have Picnic Ruiner. For 1 and a red mana, you get a Goblin Rogue. It's a 2/2, and whenever Picnic Ruiner attacks while you control a creature with power 4 or greater, Picnic Ruiner gains double strike until end of turn. So it's an interesting card, and the fact that it's an adventure and it's in green. So maybe in a Rakdos deck you might want 1 or 2 of these, because you're going to end up with a 4-power creature in green somewhere because there are just so many good green creatures for 3 mana that give you 4 power that it probably is going to be easy to activate the double strike ability on this. So let's talk about the adventure. Stolen Goodies is 4 mana for 3 and a green. You could distribute 3 +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control. So 3 counters, you can put them on 3 creatures, 2 creatures, 1 creature, however you want to do it. And then you've got Picnic Ruiner at the end. I really don't, even though it has some playability, this is to me very much a limited card, not something we're likely to see a whole lot of in Standard. Next, we've got Cut In for 3 and a red mana. You get a sorcery. Cut In deals 4 damage to target creature. And you create a Young Hero Roll token attached to up to 1 target creature you control. Again, another card meant for limited. The upside of getting the Young Hero Roll probably makes this playable in a limited deck that you're playing red in. Next, we have Flick a Coin for 2 and a red mana. You get an instant. Flick a Coin deals 1 damage to any target. You create a treasure token and you draw a card. So for 3 mana, actually, you're kind of getting each of the items there. You're getting 1 damage for a mana. You're getting a treasure token for a mana. You're getting a card for a mana. It's okay. Certainly a good card in limited that I would definitely want to play. But it's probably not standard playable because 3 mana, you've got a lot of other good options in red. Next, we've got Agatha's Champion for 4 and a green mana. You get a Human Knight with Bargain. It has Trample. And when Agatha's Champion enters the battlefield, if it was Bargain, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So it's got a fight ability on it. This is the second green card actually we've seen like this, where there's a fight ability on it if you bargain for that power. So again, very much a limited playable card, but again, probably not playable in Standard, even with that ability on it. And our last card of the day is Brave the Wilds. For 1 green mana, you get a sorcery with Bargain, and if the spell was Bargain, target land you control becomes a 3/3 elemental creature with haste. That's still a land. And you get to search your library for a basic land, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. So it's an interesting way of looking at a 1 mana spell that's really meant to go get a basic land out of your deck, put it into, and you can then put it into your hand and hopefully play it on the next turn or that turn if you don't have anything else to play on that turn for land. And that the bargain ability of creating a 3/3 might be relevant in some games. So there's maybe some limited standard playability. In limited, this is a good card because it'll quickly ramp you early in the game, and if you get it late in the game, not only do you go get a land, but then you get a 3/3 elemental, assuming you can bargain for that ability. Alright, that's it for day 4 of Wild Eldraine spoilers. Special thanks again to Caffeinated Gamers for sponsoring this video, and remember to like and subscribe to get further Wild Eldraine spoiler videos throughout spoiler season. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.